Is there another version of you in this universe? Similar phenomena have been known since ancient times and are found in the folklore of most peoples. It is called doppelganger in English, a word taken from German meaning double, which in fact means a similar or second version. For a living human being, the image has an ethereal characteristic, showing others completely separate from its owner, causing surprise and fear in the psyche. To clarify this issue further, let us take some realistic examples from human experience. This is our first experience. At around 3 a.m., my little niece woke me up to go to the bathroom with her because she was afraid to go alone, and none of her sisters were willing to wake up and go with her. And I immediately agreed, because I didn't want her to pee on the bed. And it was cold. And when I went to the bathroom, I found her barefoot. I insisted she go to her room and wear her shoes. But she's still standing. There, immobile, she went to her room to get her shoes. And when she turned on the light, she found her sleeping on the bed, and in the lobby, the other version stands. I looked at her shocked and scared, and I didn't know what to do but scream. Then I saw the other girl disappear through the wall. Henry detailed his horrific experience. I went home one afternoon, parked in the garage, then went inside and took the stairs to my room to change my clothes. When I got to the top of the stairs, I looked down and saw my wife standing there and looking at me weirdly. I thought she wanted something from me, but she didn't talk to me, just stood there motionless and looked at me. Behind me, we thought she was looking at something behind me, and there was an open window right behind me, so I looked across, and I was stunned when I watched my wife trim trees in the back garden of the house. So who's this one standing down the ladder? I turned again, and the second version of my wife was still standing down looking at me, and then I saw her walking away, and I came down the ladder speeding to try to catch her, but she disappeared, evaporated. This was the strangest situation I've ever experienced, and I haven't told my wife about it, so you don't panic. On one page, the dreamer detailed his experience. I woke up in the morning and watched the news for a while in bed. While I was busy watching the news, my mother suddenly entered the room. She didn't look at me. She kept walking until I got to the window. Then I went out the window and disappeared. I was so scared. My mother was 80 and she lived in a nursing home a few miles from my house. How could she show up in my room? And I expected the worst. I thought she was dead, so I called the nursing home, but they told me there was nothing wrong with her. I went to see her in the evening and she was asleep, and the big surprise is that she was wearing the same dress that I saw her wearing when she showed up in my room that morning. Sometimes a voice alone can reveal similar situations, as happened to someone who told us about his experience. Shortly after I went to bed, before I slept, I heard my father call me, and he walked into the room and asked me if I needed money. And I didn't look at him because my face was heading the other way. I answered him negative without looking at him at the time. While my father was talking to me, my phone rang, and I was shocked to see the caller's name, and I was stunned. And the call from my father was telling me that he forgot his personal wallet when he walked out of the house and asked me to bring it to him. And another story says, Stephanie has a resemblance too, but he never reveals his face. He likens it to clothes, the public body, and the color of her distinctive red hair, and the face alone knows how to be. Stephanie's sister and mother had frightening experiences with this mysterious likeness, and they listed some of those experiments on a foreign site, from which we quote the following: the look-alike. Is there another version of you in this universe? On one page, the dreamer detailed his experience. I woke up in the morning and watched the news for a while in bed. While I was busy watching the news, my mother suddenly entered the room. She didn't look at me. She kept walking until I got to the window. Then I went out the window and disappeared. I was so scared. My mother was 80 and she lived in a nursing home a few miles from my house. How could she show up in my room? And I expected the worst. I thought she was dead, so I called the nursing home, but they told me there was nothing wrong with her. I went to see her in the evening and she was asleep, and the big surprise is that she was wearing the same dress that I saw her wearing when she showed up in my room that morning. Sometimes a voice alone can reveal similar situations, as happened to someone who told us about his experience. Shortly after I went to bed, before I slept, I heard my father call me, and he walked into the room and asked me if I needed money. And I didn't look at him because my face was heading the other way. I answered him negative without looking at him at the time. While my father was talking to me, my phone rang, and I was shocked to see the caller's name, and I was stunned. And the call from my father was telling me that he forgot his personal wallet when he walked out of the house and asked me to bring it to him. And another story says, Stephanie has a resemblance too, but he never reveals his face. He likens it to clothes, the public body, and the color of her distinctive red hair, and the face alone knows how to be. Stephanie's sister and mother had frightening experiences with this mysterious likeness, and they listed some of those experiments on a foreign site, from which we quote the following: the look-alike. Is there another version of you in this universe? Her hair was on her face. Stephanie's mother says that one morning I woke up around 10 o'clock and was surprised that my daughter Stephanie was home. I was angry that I thought she missed the school bus and that I should now take her myself to school and apologize for being late. My anger was compounded by the fact that she was moving non-stop like a mobile shuttle from one room to another, wearing her school uniform, but I didn't see her face clearly because her hair was covered in her face, and she was putting a towel around her head, as if she had just come out of the bathroom. She walked at a wondrous speed, as if she were an old silent film character. I took a walk behind her and shouted at her for being late to school, and then I saw her go into her room, and I walked in behind her. But when I walked in, I was surprised that the room was empty, no trace of even my daughter. When Stephanie returned from school that afternoon, I asked why she was late in the morning. I was surprised to say that she left the house early and took the bus like her sister, and that she was sitting inside her class at the time I watched her at home, and her sister confirmed what she said. Stephanie's sister Sophie also had a disturbing experience with her sister, saying about her, "One night I was lying in bed, half asleep, and Stephanie walked into my room and started messing with my stuff. I got angry and started screaming at her to get out because I wanted to sleep. I couldn't see her face clearly because her hair was falling on her face, but she was wearing the same clothes as Stephanie, and when she yelled at her, she stood up and walked out of the room. She noticed immediately that she was walking weird. She was walking super fast. When I finally left, I was so angry that sleep had gone from my eyes. I went to her room to blame her, but when I opened the door, I was surprised that she was sleeping in bed, and when I told her what happened the next morning, I swore that she wasn't in my room last night." Perhaps the strangest occurrence of similarity is when a person sees a person who looks like him. Let's take, for example, Jack's story on his website. At the beginning of my life, I was a bankrupt orphan, living and working on a large farm in the countryside with cruel people, and it was my duty to care for people. I went every night around 10 a.m. to close and lock the farm gate near the public road. I had to walk about 2 miles. One night, I went out to close the gate as usual. I was walking slowly, indulging in my questions and my worries, when suddenly I felt someone walking by me. I was so happy, and looked around, and the moon was a full moon, and my vision was clear. But I didn't see anyone, and I kept walking after a while, and I felt the same way. I looked back and found nobody. As I turned around and kept walking, I saw a man standing in front of me, and I don't know where he came from, and how he suddenly became a copy of me. The same face, the body, the clothes, even the hairstyle. It was like I was looking at myself in the mirror. We were standing, looking at each other, not talking. But when I looked at him, I heard a whispering voice in my mind. "Don't worry. All the problems will be solved soon. Everything will be fine." Then I saw my similar features gradually disappear until they were completely gone. And for some reason, instead of feeling scared, on the contrary, I was filled with a sense of satisfaction and peace of mind that I had never felt before in my life, and I continued to walk towards the door. This time, I was determined and positive, as if someone had discharged all the worries and burdens from me at once until things started to really improve for me. I got a decent job on a farm, I got married, had kids, had a happy family life. Years have passed, but I will never forget that. Similar phenomena are not limited to the stories and experiences of readers circulating in sites. In turn, historical and literary books also mention some of the strange events and attitudes related to this phenomenon. On 22nd June 1893, Admiral George Tryon led the British Royal Navy fleet to conduct exercises in the Mediterranean. The weather was great, and everything went smoothly all day. But that afternoon, the admiral accidentally gave an order to one of the destroyers accompanying the command ship to turn differently. As a result, the command ship sank, and 357 sailors aboard died. The admiral refused to leave the ship when it sank and decided to dive deep with his officers and men, his last words being, "It's entirely my fault." Curiously, as Admiral dived deep into the sea near Tripoli on the Lebanese coast, his wife was having a lavish ceremony at her home in London, invited by many friends and relatives. During this ceremony before everyone's eyes, something incredible happened. Admiral Tryon, in uniform, headed by decorations and medals, came down the stairs from the second floor and walked quietly among the audience. He walked across the hall to the living room and disappeared. His sudden appearance was a major shock to attendees, especially as news of his death broke the following day. Admiral Tryon's story is not unique, as similar events have been experienced by people who experienced a similar experience shortly before their death. So some Westerners view the phenomenon of the likeness as a bad omen, a sign of imminent death. Celebrities whose portraits emerged during their lives include U.S. President Abraham Lincoln, British Queen Elizabeth I, Russian Empress Catherine II, and British poet Percy Shelley. But there are also some incidents where people live for a long time, despite the appearance of their peers. Let's take the story of French teacher Émilie Sage as an example. Mrs. Sage lived in the 19th century. She was a French language teacher renowned for excellence and ability, but for some reason Miss George did not stay long in the school at which she worked, and in a few years she moved between 19, until she finally ended up in a girls' boarding school in Latvia, that small state overlooking the Baltic Sea. At first, the school administration and students were quite satisfied with Ms. George's performance, but that did not last long, as she quickly revealed to everyone the secret that was dying the poor teacher and forcing her to move from one job to another. One student whispered in her colleague's ear, who referred to Ms. George walking through the main courtyard of the school. All students talk about the same topic, and it's not just rumor. In Ms. Sagi's class, the likeness was seen by 13 students during one of Ms. Sagi's classes. While she was writing on the board, her likeness appeared next to her. It was a matching version of her, in everything, even in the movements, except that he had no chalk in his hand. Strangely, all the female students present witnessed the resemblance, with the exception of Ms. Sagi, who did not miss his appearance. A few days later, at dinner, the look-alike reappeared behind the chair on which Ms. George was sitting and began mimicking her movements as she ate, but did not grab the spoon. Once again, a person resembling her appeared in front of more than 40 students in the class of embroidery and sewing. During the semester, all students can see teacher Sagi picking flowers in the garden through the classroom windows. It happened during the lesson that the teacher of embroidery and sewing came out of the classroom for a few minutes to talk to a colleague. And here it happened so weird. In the empty teacher's chair, a resemblance to Ms. Sagi was clearly seen by all the students. Sitting there without any movement while Ms. Sagi was still gathering flowers in the nearby garden. But it seemed obvious that Ms. Sagi's movement in the garden had some lethargy when her likeness appeared inside the classroom. One bold student stood up and tried to touch the statue, but she felt a light resistance in the air around it and retreated. Another student, who was bolder than his seat, jumped between the table and the chair, penetrated the character's body with his feet, but Miss George's character continued to sit motionless, and then began to gradually disappear until she disappeared completely. When they asked Ms. Sagi about her likeness, she said that he had been chasing her all her life and causing her trouble, but she had never seen him. The only sign of that was the sudden feeling of fatigue and drowsiness, as if the appearance was absorbing energy from her body. Unfortunately, the likeness was the reason for Ms. Sagi's constant movement between schools. They bring fear to female students, forcing the school to terminate Ms. Sagi's services. About a week later, after appearing similar to him in the embroidery and sewing class, the director summoned Ms. George and terminated her services. The likeness of Miss Sagi was repeatedly cut off, and Sir Frederick Rush's likeness as a British MP caused him inconvenience and fiddly banter only. Here's the story, dear listener. In 1906, Sir Gilbert Parker was sitting in an important meeting of the British Parliament, and during the meeting, he happened to look back at his colleague and friend, Sir Frederick Rush, sitting in a nearby seat, much to his surprise. Lana knew Sir Frederick had a cold and was lying in his house in bad condition. Who brought him to Parliament today? Without much thought, Sir Parker greeted his colleague and said, "Mr. Frederick, I hope you are doing better today." But to his surprise, his friend completely ignored him and just seemed sad. Sir Parker returned to pursue the proceedings, feeling uncomfortable with the neglect his friend showed him. And after a while, he looked back at the place where Sir Frederick was sitting and was surprised by his disappearance and his empty seat. After the hearing, Sir Parker asked his colleagues whether they had seen Sir Frederick, some of whom replied positively and said that he looked cold and never spoke, but none of them watched him leave his seat and leave Parliament House. He simply disappeared suddenly, as if he had evaporated. The next day, a friend visited Sir Frederick at his home, and he had to ignore him to his colleagues during the previous Parliament session. Sir Frederick replied that he had been and was still sick in bed, who had not left his house, and had not attended a session of Parliament in 2 weeks. But he was not surprised to see his likeness inside the Parliament chamber, because by his allegation, he desperately wanted to attend that session. Sir Frederick's family was horrified to believe that seeing the likeness might be a sign of his imminent death, especially as he was ill and his condition was dire. But Sir Frederick did not die, as healed and returned to exercise his duties as a member of Parliament. Because he did not survive the cynicism and joke of fiddling for the remainder of his life, his colleagues went on to invade him with their fingers occasionally to make sure that he was truly Sir Frederick and not the look-alike. French writer Guy de Maupassant, 1850–1893, also has a famous story with his resemblance mentioned in one of his books. I was sitting in my office one evening struggling to find new ideas for my next novel. Suddenly, someone walked into the room. Strange that it was a copy of me in everything. It looked exactly like me, came forward from me and sat in the chair before me, and then he dictated what I had to write. The novel dictated by the look-alike on de Maupassant was called The Horla, a terrifying novel about an evil entity that cloaks people's bodies and feeds on their minds to drive them crazy. Ironically, de Maupassant went crazy after a while of publishing this novel and was admitted to the mental health facility where he died, leading some to conclude that the likeness of Maupassant appeared and dictated the details of the novel was the same one who lived on his mind and led him to madness and death. Is there an explanation for the resemblance? The experiences and stories we mentioned earlier are only a simple sample, as many of them are posted on sites and buried in the bellies of books, indicating the widespread phenomenon. I am sure that many people have experienced similar situations without talking about them, as most people believe that keeping such things under wraps may prevent them from happening again, and the horror may prevent them from talking about them. But their greatest concern is to know their causes and the nature of the beings behind them. Here we will make some hypotheses that try to explain this phenomenon. According to the religious heritage, Every human being has a lifetime of consent. From birth until his death, this spouse is a jinn. His job is to Jesus and decorate the bad things of man so that he diverts him from the right. We can resemble him with that idea that suddenly notifies your mind without warning to incite you to work that contravenes your faith and insults you into that disagreement. Because jinn is longer than human beings, the spouse stays after his owner's death and may appear to people on his body in places where he used to be. The seer thinks he is a ghost witness and does not know he is the witness to the dead spouse. It is said that the spouse is also able to leave his/her owner's body in his/her lifetime to appear to the people in his/her body and shape, which gives a possible explanation for the phenomenon of the likeness, since what the people who have been through this phenomenon have seen is the consent of the person who they were accused of seeing. But there are religious scholars who deny the possibility of this happening, since the spouse can never leave his owner's body in his life, because he is a client and is charged with accompanying him. He is one of the two guards entrusted to each born in this world, one a clean angel guarding him and inciting him to do good, and the other a spiteful devil of the jinn demons adorning him with wrongs and bad things. Both guards are committed to their functions and do not lose sight of them for one moment as long as man survives. It is worth mentioning that the pharaohs are the first to believe in the idea of the spouse, and they said that every human being created by the gods creates with him an entity called Ka, accompanies him all his life, and he's only at the hour of his death, but he's a temporary parting. Ka stays with her owner's body, waiting for the soul to be able, from passing the dangerous journey to the court of the gods, to stand in the presence of Dian the dead Osiris, and if the spirit successfully passes her trial, she returns to unite. K. Together they form a spirit of light, called Brother, who ascends to heaven to live with the gods. Jinn are ethereal beings living in a different world from ours, and are said to have seen us ages ago while we can't see them. According to religious and popular traditions, some are peaceful and do no harm to people. Others are evil and like manipulating people and may take over their bodies, and the latter is known in Western culture as spiteful evil spirit. Human beings could harm human beings and possess their bodies. Of course, the world of elves is still unknown, and its details cannot be precisely determined. But many stories revolve around that hidden world full of secrets, some of which tell of the elves' superhero abilities. Different shapes and images, usually animal shapes like black cats, but it also had the capacity to take the form of man, and the Arabs mentioned many stories of jinn in their myths and poetry that took the form of man. One of the most famous is the soul, which appears as a beautiful woman in wild, disrupted places seeking help. She tricks and seduces travelers until they ride behind her camel or horse, waiting for the right opportunity. Let's leave them and kill them and eat their livers. Something terrifying, dear listener. Do you agree with me? They take the form of human beings for different purposes. They enjoy playing and manipulating human beings. They include lovers in the form of handsome young men or beautiful girls looking for a romantic relationship with a man or woman. There is also a third and most dangerous species, appearing as human beings, terrifying their victims and preparing to own them. It is said that the more human fear of it, the easier it is to own it. This extraordinary ability to take the human form offers us a reasonable explanation for the phenomenon of the likeness, perhaps a soul-like who wants to terrorize his victims, equip their bodies, or communicate with the woman he loves. Another theory of multiple worlds, parallel worlds, and slippage of time. In quantum physics, there is a theory known as multiple worlds, which is based on the fact that the universe is not one as we imagine it, but there are countless universes, in each of which there is a second version of the same person, but with different motives determined by his choices and their consequence. This theory is not a figment of fiction, It is a scientific theory supported by mathematical equations. It was studied and researched by physicists, and recently increased interest in it after some of them proved possible to achieve, and it caused me a severe headache until I could understand what she was talking about. That's if you ever get something. I will try to simplify them by way of examples. Imagine thinking about marrying your girlfriend. This kind of thinking leaves you with two options: to marry or not to marry. According to the theory of multiple worlds, simply thinking about it will divide the universe into two worlds. In the first universe, you will actually marry your lover, and in the second universe, you will remain single, married, and single versions. We'll live in two separate worlds, neither of which is aware of the other's existence. Let's say that after you marry the lover for some time, differences arise between you and you start thinking about divorce. Here, the universe will be divided into two worlds, and in one of them, you will choose divorce. While in the other case, you will try to reconcile with your wife, leave us your version of the reconciliation, and continue your version of the insistence on divorce. On the morning specified for you, you go to court to complete the divorce. You're standing in front of your closet thinking which one you're going to wear, your white shirt or your blue shirt. Once you think about it, two new worlds emerge. In one you will wear a white shirt, in the other you will wear a blue shirt. Let's leave the white shirt holder to chase the blue shirt. After I left the house, I started. You think about it. Should you park a taxi or take a bus? Here, one copy of you will take a taxi and another version will take the bus. These divisions will continue throughout your life, and every time you have to make a decision, new universes will emerge based on the number of your choices, ultimately creating millions of universes where people live in each copy of you. Depending on the choices you make, you may become a cleaner in a world, a doctor in another world, a pilot in a third world, a doctor in a fourth world, a serial killer in a fifth world, and a dead man in another world, and so on. The best thing about multiple world theory is that you can never die, and even if you try to kill yourself by shooting yourself, there will always be a live version of you in another world, because there are always two options. Either the gun works or does not work, or you will succeed in injuring your head or not, either the damage is fatal or not, etc. Under the second option, your suicide attempts will continue indefinitely. There is also a theory in quantum physics called parallel world theory, which is similar to the theory of multiple worlds. Each universe is a membrane containing other universes, and there may be a different version in each universe. You and these copies all live in a closed parallel space, which means that you and a second copy of you may live in the same room without anyone knowing the other's existence, because you're in two separate places. Wait a moment. What does all this empty basement above have to do with our story of resemblance? This is a good question. The answer is that every theory and everything in this universe can be wrong and can be influenced by some deviations, so some in these theories find a possible explanation of absentee issues and irrelevant issues as long as they raise our bewilderment and fears, as well as metaphysical issues that have long caused us confusion and fear, like ghosts, spirits, etc. Defects or temporary deviations in the physical laws governing these multiple worlds are considered possible and may lead to temporary disturbances between them, allowing short-term direct contact between the inhabitants of these worlds. For example, imagine that as you walk around your home, there is a physical aberration or defect that makes your current world interfere with another world where another version of you lives in a house that looks exactly like yours. The house you will enter is also your own, and of course, this will only last for a few days because you will disappear once the problem is over.